night. Tom?
All right, we'll bring that to our viewers' feed. Thank you. Well, you've probably never heard of neuroblastoma. If you're a parent or grandparent, it's a diagnosis you never want to hear. It's a cancer that is most common in children under the age of 5. The treatment is long and harrowing, lasting 18 months. It involves intense chemotherapy. At the end of that, there's still only a 50% survival rate. Thankfully, taking DFMO, that's a tablet medication, can increase survival to 75%, but Australian children don't have access to it. They have to fly at the moment to the US just to access tablets. For an immunocompromised child, catching a cold on a plane in this situation could be life-threatening. The total cost as well for a family, $500,000. The CEO of Neuroblastoma Australia is calling on the Australian government to step in and help. Lucy Jones knows the heartbreak of the disease, having lost her daughter Sienna to it in 2010. I spoke to her earlier today. Lucy Jones, thanks for your time. So neuroblastoma, I guess for people who haven't heard of it, they're probably lucky, because if you have, you might have dealt with it. What is it briefly, and how does it affect children in particular?
So neuroblastoma is a really aggressive disease. Unfortunately, it affects very young children, and the survival rate for aggressive neuroblastoma is only 50%. Treatment is very extensive. It takes over 18 months. It includes things like high-dose chemotherapy multiple times, surgery, stem cell transplants, radiotherapy, and then maintenance therapy on top of that. It's a really extensive and often traumatic journey when you have a child diagnosed with neuroblastoma.
And so people get that treatment in Australia, kids can get that treatment, but there's a drug as well you're hoping they can get access to. What would that change compared to what happens right now?
So currently, when children finish treatment in Australia, they would like to access a drug called DFMO. Now, this drug was approved by the FDA in America in December last year. It was approved on the basis that it actually reduced the risk of relapse by an amazing 50%. So if you're a parent who has a child and you know there's a drug out there that might save your child by reducing the risk of relapse by 50%, obviously you want that drug and you need that drug to save your child.
Yeah, not just the survival rate, but the treatment you mentioned is horrific. So cutting that by 50%.
So the treatment would stay in place. They would need to access this drug within 3 months of completing standard treatments. And at the moment, what families are having to do is fundraise hundreds of thousands of dollars and take an immunocompromised child overseas up to 5 times over 2 years to access the drug at a huge, huge emotional and financial cost to themselves.
I think we've all seen probably GoFundMes where people need that treatment. So you're saying, I know you've been saying, up to $500,000. Now, some families will raise that, some won't, I guess. They would. You'd do anything you could for your kid in that circumstance, but they wouldn't be able to do it.
But can you imagine that you've got a young child that's been diagnosed with a really aggressive cancer, you've gone through hell and back all through these treatments, and then there's a drug that might save your child's life. Obviously, you're going to do everything you possibly can, but you're right, some families have more contacts, have more extensive networks, and also are able to travel, and some families simply aren't able to travel. So right now, it's a really inequitable situation, and we're asking the federal government to come and help these families and provide the funding that is required to access this drug, DFMO, in Australia now.
And that would be, first of all, to quickly get it approved in Australia, but then also make it affordable, effectively go through the PBS. Is that the call?
So this drug is currently going through the regulatory approval process. So DFMO is going through an accelerated pathway for approval. It will hopefully become available in Australia in about 1 year's time, but that simply is not fast enough for children with neuroblastoma. Sadly, a very high percentage relapse very quickly after finishing treatment. So they need to access this drug immediately. And to currently acquire this drug, the only way to get this is for that oncologist to apply for access and for that drug to be funded by the federal government. So we are asking the federal government to fund $15 million over 2 years to ensure every child with high-risk neuroblastoma can access this life-saving drug.
It's some sense there's not a lot of money in a federal budget. What's been the response so far from the government?
The government so far has indicated they would very much like to support us, and they are motivated to help these families affected by this devastating childhood cancer. We have had some limited discussions with the government, but at the moment we haven't seen any proposal on the table. We do need to see some action because, as I've mentioned, children with high-risk neuroblastoma do not have the luxury of time. They do not have the luxury of conversations. We need action, and we need to have a clear proposal. We need to fund this drug immediately so these children can have the chance of survival.
Lucy Jones, appreciate you. Yeah, I know a growing number of MPs are on board. We'll see if Mark Butler is one of them.